What is a synchronicity? How does it work? And how do you know that it's actually not just a coincidence? Well, today I'm going to share a very personal story of synchronicity where I was given information that actually saved my mom's life as she was in critical condition in the hospital. This single event sent me down a path of learning how to recognize and listen to signs from the universe. Are you ready? I'm going to use the word synchronicity, where physics meets spirituality as coincidences that are meaningful to the participant, in which something other than the probability of chance is involved. I'm going to share a story from a time in my life when I was much more left brain logical and skeptical, and when I didn't have any kind of a spiritual practice. Now, this might apply to a lot of you right now. This experience fundamentally expanded my perception and also made me feel more intimately connected, not only to the people in my life, but also to every person on the planet as a collective. And that shift helped me to be more right brained, creative, and spiritual. And it opened me to hearing more easily how the universe speaks to us. This is a story of how I received a big answer from the universe. This story begins when I was 21 years old. My parents, who were only about 20 years older than me, were avid cyclists, and they would often go on these long bike rides together. Well, this particular weekend, they were out on a very remote county road, not very far from the house, and they were only doing a little short 30-mile bike ride. So as they were riding along, it was a very, very windy day, and the gusts of wind had picked up. And at some point, they were too close to each other, and the gusts caused them to collide together. And when that happened, my mom actually had her special cleats, bicycle cleats, that locked into these pedals, and it had a toe clip which kept her foot locked on that pedal. And so when she collided with my dad, she went up over the handlebars with absolutely no control and hit her head, slammed it into the concrete. My dad had a little bit of road rash, but aside from that, that was all he had. And my mom was not very respondent after this happened. Now, these are the days before cell phones existed, and my mom was very, very lucky because a man happened by on this remote country road at about the time the accident happened, and he went to go get help and call for an ambulance. And my mom was taken to a local hospital. Now, back in college, I had a long distance boyfriend, which meant that many weekends I was completely out of state. And I also had a job. But on this particular day, I happened to be home because remember, there are no cell phones. And the phone rang, and it was my dad. And he was trying to be very calm, but I could hear in his voice that he was shaken. And he said, "Your mom has just been in a bicycle accident, and I need you to grab a few things, gather them for me, and then I need you to drive very calmly to the hospital. She's going to be okay." But there was something in the way he was talking that I didn't believe him, and I immediately went into a full-blown panic, adrenaline rush. My heart was pounding, and I was so scared. And at that particular moment, my friend had just happened to stop by to show me her brand new car. And of course, she drove me to the hospital, probably preventing me from getting in an accident. So my mom is at this hospital. She's not doing very well. They have to transport her to another larger hospital in a larger city about 45 minutes away. And so she goes. And my mom was only 42 years old at this point in time. She was a beautiful woman with long curly hair. My mom was so attractive that in college, when I would go to the beach with her, the college guys would pay way more attention to her than they would to me. So my dad and I gather our stuff. We get to the hospital as quickly as we can. And when we walk in to see my mom, we're in absolute shock. They have completely shaved her entire head. She hardly even looks like herself. She's all bruised up. And they inform us that what's happened is that she's had a massive head injury and she has what they call a contusion, which is essentially a bruise on her brain. And they explain that they're giving her medication to try and relieve the pressure because you have a little bit of room between your brain and your skull, but not a lot. And her brain was swelling very rapidly. At one point in time, they decided the medication wasn't enough. They actually carved out and cut a rectangular piece of her skull to lift so that her brain was completely exposed and that it would have room to expand so that it didn't put pressure on the top of the base of her spinal cord, which would cut off all of her autonomic nervous system, which includes breathing and heartbeats. So they were very, very scared and worried about her. So the next day, we went back to the hospital. This is the day after the accident. And the neurosurgeon who has been assigned to my mom comes in. And he explains that we have two options. Now, luckily, my grandfather has arrived. And this is my dad's dad. And my grandpa was one of the most intelligent people that I've ever met. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He was a very accomplished pilot, had flown in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And after exiting the Air Force, he actually became a bank president because his major was in finance and economics. And so I was really relieved to have my grandpa there. So here I am, 21. My dad's in his 40s and my grandpa's in his 60s. And the surgeon talks to us and says, well, we have two options. We can control her swelling with medicine the best that we can. But the second option is that we could go in and do a surgery. And what we would have to do is we would have to scrape off and remove a portion of her brain to relieve the swelling. And we'd have to take a little bit extra to account for the swelling from the surgery and that would trauma would cause on her brain. But the problem is that we don't know a lot about the brain. And we don't know exactly what could be affected. So it could affect her motor skills and she might not be able to walk again. It could leave her blind. It could leave her with memory issues. It could even change her personality. But you, family, have to decide. Now, as you can imagine, this was just a daunting task. And my dad looked to his father for guidance and help. But my grandpa refused to give him any type of an opinion and said that the decision would have to be made by my dad. So we sat there that day and we had a lot of discussions. And one of the things that had happened was that I was enrolled in business school. I was in my junior year of college and I had just begun a class. This was in October timeframe in international business. And the week before, we had just begun studying the cultural differences in business that happen when you deal with different people of different nationalities and how their culture can impact a business deal or negotiations because everybody comes from a much different perspective and background. And so I began thinking about this and I thought, wow, well, my mom's surgeon is an Indian man. And I wonder if this is affecting and impacting how he's speaking to us. Maybe he's really more adamant about the surgery than we even know. And so I suggested that we go to his office and speak with his nurse. And my dad and grandpa agreed that that was a really good idea. So we did that. We went to go speak with her and we told her the dilemma and we told her the decision that we had been given to either continue with this medication and hope that the swelling decreases or go in and have surgery. And she looked at us and said, if the doctor even mentioned the word surgery, he is so ultra conservative based on his Indian upbringing. He is not a pushy person. If he said surgery, that's what you should do. And my dad made that excruciating decision. And at 6 a.m. the next morning, my mom went into brain surgery. It was supposed to last 6 hours, but of course, there are always complications in these types of surgeries. And the time ticked past the 6 hours and 7 hours. And finally, the surgeon came out. And with a big sigh of relief, he said, the surgery went very well. But we are very lucky that we performed the surgery today because if we had waited only 2 hours longer, the spinal cord would have pressed and swollen and would have cut off all of her autonomic nervous system and she would have died. So, can you imagine the relief we felt as a family having made the right decision? And can you imagine how much that bonded me with my dad? And how lucky was my mom, because she survived that surgery, and she survived that surgery with almost no ill effect. It did affect her memory for a few years after the surgery, but she is a completely normal functioning person. She was able to attend my wedding a year and a half later. She was able to be there for the birth of my 2 children. She has now been happily married to my dad for over 50 years and has just welcomed her great-grandchild into the world. So, for the first time in my life, I saw how prayers or requests could be answered in very specific ways with answers from the universe, but you have to be open. You almost have to disconnect from that left brain logical side and sink into accepting and looking for answers from more of that heart space, from that right brain creative, more loving side. And I can see how many elements in hindsight had to come together for us to be able to make this incredible choice. And look at the perfect timing in all of those synchronicities. The fact that I happened to be home and not out of town, not out of the state that weekend. The fact that my friend had come over to drive me so that I didn't get in an accident, being in that altered state of panic. The fact that I was enrolled in an international business course that just happened to be studying cultural differences, that made me think and look at that situation differently and go to talk to that nurse to get this answer that we should indeed definitely have that surgery. And how all those decisions came together. Parents being on that remote country road and somebody coming by when there were no cell phones. I mean, it was really an incredible set of circumstances. But in order for me to embrace them as more than chance, I really had to challenge my old thoughts, and my beliefs and my fears had to be challenged as well. And maybe you are struggling with this concept. Maybe up until now, your world has been very random. It has looked like everything happens in a chaotic way with not a lot of order. Maybe you have not been seeing signs from the universe. Maybe you've even felt alone and abandoned in your life. And I would like to share this quote with you. We human beings tend to experience ourselves as something separate from the whole we call the universe. This is actually an optical delusion of our consciousness. It's like a prison for us. Our task is to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. This striving for such an achievement is a path to our liberation and the only true foundation of our inner peace and security. And the author of this quote, Albert Einstein. The first thing that we need to do to begin seeing signs from the universe is to ask. And this can come in several different methods. Could be an act of prayer to God, your higher self, universal consciousness, whoever it is that you can relate to as the universe. It could just be a conversation that you have in your head. For some people, it might feel more concrete to write this down in a journal or on a note on your phone. Or maybe you can just have a conversation with a friend or a loved one. But the important thing is, you have to ask. And once you ask, it's really important to listen for the answers. And if I rearrange the letters in the word listen, we get silent. And that's how you can hear the messages and the responses to your questions. There are 2 ways to live your life, either as if everything is a miracle or as if nothing is. Albert Einstein. The universe whispers to you. Will you listen?